have 4 presentations, and I think the order is, the speakers know the order, right? Barry, then Eric, are you second? Yes. Okay. And after Eric is? Amy. And then? Silly. Oh, okay. Like last week, it's 15 minutes for the talk, and then 10 minutes for Q&A. And who's keeping time? Okay, Echo. And you'll give a signal when? At 10 minutes, and you have 5 minutes left for the talk. Okay. And then any more after that? No. Then the final. Okay. So please respect the time. And after this, let me say one thing about not today's talks. The final assignment is due next Wednesday, right? This you know. What I want to say is I need to change the time of day. So it's next Wednesday. It's still next Wednesday. But you need to turn it in by noon, by 12. Okay? Because we need to organize it all and have it ready for us to look at by the afternoon that day. So does everyone understand? We'll send an email and put it on VB to remind you. 12 o'clock, noon, not midnight. Noon, next Wednesday. All right, any questions about that? Clear? Okay. So if not, then Barry. Okay, good. Right. I was going to sort of be a conference moderator, but I can't see this PowerPoint, so you can take care of that.
Okay, before I begin, I just want to say sorry I wasn't here last week. The day before New Year's, I ate something about food poisoning, and I was in the hospital. So it was a bad New Year's. So during New Year's, when everybody was like, I was like, the whole time. So I'm sorry about that. Before I get into the main presentation, I just wanted to introduce the conference for 1 or 2 minutes. This is for the upcoming conference, but I went to BAL, the British Association for Applied Linguistics in the UK, and this is the theme for the next conference, and here's the dates, September 5th through 7th, and they have 2 different types of presentation types, 20-minute oral presentation and a poster presentation. But poster presentations over there are a little bit different than other conferences. Sometimes in other conferences, if they think your paper is not good enough, maybe you will be given a chance to present as a poster. Over there, it's really, people really want to have a poster presentation. So don't think if you submit as a oral presentation, you will be bumped to a poster presentation. It's a little bit different. And they also have several special interest groups, which offers you a good opportunity to communicate with researchers that are doing similar research to yourself. Okay? So you can just Google it if you're interested to know more about the conference. So now we're starting the real thing. Good afternoon.
Tell them it was in a SIG, right?
Yeah, it was
Tell
in a
them
SIG.
so they know the SIG you were presenting it.
Yeah, I presented in the vocabulary studies SIG. So I got feedback, and the people in the audience were all doing vocabulary research. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. The title of my presentation today is Word Form Variation Matters More Than Frequency of Exposure in Incidental Vocabulary Acquisition. The outline of my talk for today will be, I will give a brief introduction and literature review, then I will go into the methodology for my research, followed by my results and a short discussion, and finally some concluding remarks. So incidental vocabulary acquisition through reading has been assumed to play a big role in language acquisition. And what exactly is incidental vocabulary acquisition? Well, it's been defined as the opposite of intentional vocabulary learning. And also the learning of new vocabulary from reading, when the main purpose is not to learn vocabulary. And also just when subjects in experimental research are not aware that later, after some type of treatment, that their knowledge of the vocabulary that appeared within this treatment will be assessed. And the research has shown that vocabulary can be acquired incidentally by while reading, and the most central issue that is examined in this big body of research is frequency of exposure, meaning how many times that the research subjects need to encounter words before they can learn them. But there have been some questions raised within this research about differences in acquisition results, meaning the number of words that are acquired between studies and also within individual studies. And this research has looked at several different variables, including target language proficiency, context clues, first language lexicalization, assessment methods, target word frequency, and target word frequency of exposure. We did a review of 24 second language incidental vocabulary acquisition studies, and we found implicit notions of identity across multiple tokens. That means what the researchers were defining as what is a word, because they're assessing vocabulary, so they define what is the same word differently. So the frequency of target words taken from the learner text, they would vary depending on whether researchers included the tokens of inflected or derived word forms when they were counting the frequency of target words within learner text. If you take a look at psycholinguistic experiments that look at the processing of word tokens by second language speakers, they found some differences in processing for derived and inflected forms of words. For second language speakers, a previous encounter of a derived or regularly inflected form of a base word does not significantly influence the processing of a future encounter of the base form. But if it's the same exact form of the word, that would significantly influence the processing time. Also, if you take a look at the previous research, most of the research has not really provided learners with long text. Most of them are very short paragraph readings or just a little bit longer, maybe short stories. Out of all the studies that we reviewed, we only found 6 that actually used longer text, and out of these 6, only 3 of them allowed the subjects to read out of class. The point of this is that almost all of the research, they're doing these very tight, giving these very short text to learners, and then making claims about extensive reading, making claims about learners reading large amounts of text to increase vocabulary. Yet in these experiments, they only provide the learners with very short text. So in sum, this review seems to indicate that the practices in the operationalization of repeated tokens of target words have varied across the studies reported in the literature. The previous research has used mainly just short text as learner text, and it seems that based on the psycholinguistic literature, the second language speakers rely more on the storage of memorized words. Basically, what I'm trying to say is they're unable to automatically associate the inflected and derived forms with the base form of the word. So for my study, we consider the possibility that variation in the form of target word tokens matter to incidental vocabulary acquisition through extensive reading. So that's what we investigated. So the subjects in our study was an entire class of second language learners enrolled in an elective advanced English novel reading course. There were 32 participants. And the text we gave the students was a 37,611 token novel, the BFG, and the subjects needed to finish reading this novel within 2 weeks. We chose this text because of the use of nonce words by the author. There were made up non-English words inside this novel. And So therefore, the subjects would not know these words. They would be unknown to them because this would be the first time they would have encountered these words because they would have been reading the novel for the first time. So there was no need to administer a pretest because they couldn't be exposed to these words outside of the novel. And we also asked the subjects not to consult any references or discuss the text with others to try to control, to make sure that any acquisition could be attributed to incidental learning. So 49 target words were selected from the learner text, and the frequency of occurrence that I counted when I went through the novel, I included all the inflected and derived word forms. So then each target word was coded as either lower or higher frequency, so words that appeared in the novel 2 to 4 times, or had 2 to 4 tokens was considered lower, and 5 or more tokens was considered a higher frequency word. And then each target word's identity was coded. Earlier I talked about the same exact word form, inflected forms, and derived word forms. So we had to identify each target word depending on how the tokens that appeared in the novel varied. So for words that look exactly the same, so for example, create and created would not be tokens of the same word form. So for all words that the form of the word never changed, like for example, it was create, create, create. If the word occurred in the novel 5 times, and each time it occurred, it was only as this form, create. It didn't inflect. It wouldn't come as creative. It would be coded as form. If this was allowed, if we found out, we found one of the words inflected, for example, we would label it as lexeme, create and created. So these would be considered the same word. And then family, if we found derivation, create, creative, creativity, then we would code these types of words as family. And then on the day that the subjects, they expected to participate in a class discussion of the novel, they received 2 surprise forms of vocabulary assessment. They received first a meaning recall, translation assessment, and then a meaning recognition, a multiple choice test. So 2 repeated measures ANOVAs were ran to examine the effects of frequency and token identity to try to explain the results on the assessment scores. So there was an interaction effect on the translation task between frequency and identity, and then later on we did post hoc analysis to see more into this interaction. We found the same effect for the multiple choice as well. There was also an interaction effect between frequency and identity. So here are the post hoc results. So you can see here are the 2 assessments, the translation and the multiple choice, and we're looking at the 3 categories of the words depending on how they're depending on how the tokens of each category of word either varied or did not, or how much variation the tokens exhibited. So we'll see with form for both assessments, if the target words did not vary in their form, frequency, there was no significant difference between the acquisition of lower and higher frequency words. For lexeme, for the translation task, there was no significant difference in acquisition between the lower and higher frequency words. But there was a significant difference between the lower and higher words for the multiple choice for lexeme. And for family, there was a significant difference between the lower and higher frequency words for those target words whose tokens varied at the level of family. So now I'd like to discuss these results a little bit. So this research examined the effect of variation in the target word tokens on incidental vocabulary acquisition through meaning recall and meaning recognition. And we found no significant difference in acquisition for the higher and lower frequency target words whose tokens did not vary in their form. But we found that increasing the frequency of exposure, so this means that increasing the frequency of exposure beyond 4 for target words whose token forms do not vary would not significantly affect the acquisition results. But results do show a significant difference in acquisition for higher and lower frequency target words whose tokens vary at the level of family. So maybe we can interpret this result that learners require more encounters with target words whose tokens vary at the level of family. And this could be due to learners being able to associate the different forms of target word tokens as a single lexical item. And there was also a significant difference in the acquisition of higher and lower frequency target words whose tokens varied at the level of lexeme. It was found for the meaning recognition, but not for the meaning recall. So this result also seems to indicate that for second language learners, they may require more exposure to target words whose tokens vary at the level of lexeme in order to recall the meaning, do a translation text. But if the purpose is only to maybe recognize the meaning, maybe a lower threshold may be adequate to achieve this. And my conclusions are that the less variation exhibited in the target word tokens, the less frequency affected second language instant vocabulary acquisition, and also the opposite would be true. The more variation, the more that frequency may matter. And maybe also I suggest that future researchers should clearly state what is meant by repeated exposure, especially when they make claims regarding exposure thresholds, meaning how many exposures to a word are needed before a learner can acquire that word. Thank you very much.
So we'll take questions.
Thanks for sharing your research results. You just mentioned that the tokens of the target words that vary at the level of value was due to derivation.
Yeah. Those that coded as family, the tokens they were vary at the level of, they were allowed for variation up to the level of for derivation. Correct.
Can you tell me that what suffixes they have? The tokens.
There wasn't just one suffix, so there were several. Right now, from what I remember, it was like ABLE or OUSTIVE, SONE. So there were different varied ones. There may have been some others, but I can't really remember them all. So it wasn't just like maybe just one that appeared. There were several different ones. Thank you.
Question. Other questions? All right.
I can understand what you said about the nouns word. Can you take an example for me?
Yes. For example, in the novel, instead of the word helicopter, you know this word helicopters, yeah? So instead of helicopter, inside the novel, this word appeared as belly popper. Belly popper. So belly popper is not a real word, but inside the novel, each time that helicopter was referred to, it was called a belly popper. Okay? And another was like a girls' school would be called a giggle house. Giggle house is not a real word, but inside the novel, every time that girls' schools were referred to, they were called giggle houses. So the students were tested on these type of words. Did they learn the meaning of these new made-up words? So all of those nonce words, they had the same behavior as real words, meaning that they showed inflection or derivation, and they followed like normal spelling rules. and sounds, this kind of thing. It looked like English words, but they were not English words. They were made up words.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? Or anything you rushed by that you want to elaborate, because there's some time if you want to. Yeah, is there anything that wasn't clear? You can ask him to, just like Iron's question was really asked him to clarify what is a nonce word. That was a good question. Any other things you didn't quite follow that you want him to explain more clearly? Could you sort of pinpoint how this is different from what was done before? Like, what's the contribution of it? We see the results, but why is it a contribution?
It's a contribution because the previous research, the main important thing that researchers were looking at was like, oh, we want to give students something to read, and hopefully we don't need to teach them any vocabulary. They can just read something, and then they can just, naturally learn vocabulary words. So in doing this type of research before, they just tried to count how many times words appeared in whatever text, and they gave it to students, and then they would assess them and see how many they learned. But when they looked at this kind of results, different researchers, some of the researchers would say, oh, you need 5, they need exposure to 5 times to learn a word, while other researchers may say 20. But the main point is when I look back at the research, I found different researchers were counting in different ways. Some researchers considered, oh, when I wanted to go through and count, the form of the word had to be exactly the same. If they were testing the word play, P-L-A-Y, they would only count the exact same form, P-L-A-Y, each time. But there were other researchers, if they were doing that same study, they may say, no, I think the students should be able to associate the inflected forms. So they went through and they would count P-L-A-Y, they would count P-L-A-Y-I-N-G, and past forms, etc. But they may not count derived forms, such as player, P-L-A-Y-E-R, player. Okay, but there were other researchers that did do this. Well, we may say we all should be doing the same thing as researchers, but actually maybe that's not the most important thing, because just because I'm a researcher and I do it this way, if I give this text to a learner, it doesn't mean that when the learner reads, they're going to behave that way. They're going to be able to understand that these different forms of the words are related. So I think my contribution is I pointed this out, and I've tried to look and see from the learner's point of view, is there anything going on with the relationship between how many times the learner is exposed to these words, do they encounter these words, and how the form of these words vary, is maybe to see if that has something, if that can help us to understand why the previous research showed such drastic differences in the number of exposures needed for learners to acquire words.
How are we on time? Other questions or requests for elaboration?
I'm wondering, your research I think is very inspiring and very humbling, but I'm wondering what your personal motivate about doing this research.
Because I think I love to read, and I think a lot of teachers like to give. There's some students that also like to read as well, but I think that there are a lot of extensive reading materials out there. What I mean is there's also these novels that are graded readers. They start with the level 1, level 2, and they increase them. They increase the number of vocabulary. And in these graded readers and a lot of other textbook materials, other things that are made for second language learners, all of these materials, they consider that second language learners are able to associate all of the different forms of words. So all the inflected and all the derived forms of words. So I'm thinking it seems a big jump to just automatically assume without a lot of investigation whether this is really true for learners. So maybe if we find out there's a difference, maybe this research could be used for to develop better teaching materials and better graded readers, this kind of thing. Maybe. Also for teachers that when they teach vocabulary and then they will try to have students to learn all of the inflected and derived forms of the word at the same time when they encounter one, because they just expect students can memorize all of those at the same time. So maybe that could have a negative effect. I don't know. But
Okay, time's up.
1 minute.
Oh. Other question? 1 minute question? Okay, thank you, Barry.
okay, thank you.